Canada's largest school board says it will close schools on Friday in response to a planned walkout by Ontario education workers. The Toronto District School Board says it has no option but to suspend in person learning. This comes as educational support staff protest legislation that imposes a contract and bans a strike. On Monday, the Ontario government introduced legislation to squash Friday's planned strike, but the move is getting a lot of criticism from education workers, legal experts, and most recently, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau this morning. Well, joining us now to discuss the situation is Dr. Joseph Rose, a collective bargaining and dispute resolution specialist and professor emeritus at McMaster University. Dr. Rose, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you.
So, for our national viewers who may not be familiar with the situation in Ontario, can you briefly unpack this dispute for us?
Well, it's pretty complicated, but basically it's simple as well. I mean, you have a situation in which education sector workers have been subject to a 1% freeze for 3 years. And now the back to work legislation says we're going to give you 4 more at a rate much lower than what the union is seeking.
Now, the real sticking point here, a lot of attention is being brought to this notwithstanding clause. We just heard from the Prime Minister this morning criticizing it. So, what are your thoughts on this notwithstanding clause?
It's terrible in simple terms. It doesn't make any sense other than allowing the government to do whatever it wants to do. We already know that the wage freeze dispute for 3 years is subject to a charter challenge. So they want to head that off. Basically, they want their meal and they want to eat it too. I mean, it's problematic in the sense that it closes a lot of doors to not only this group, but the teachers who are waiting in the wings.
And on that note, how do you expect this move to impact future labor relations with the province?
Well, it's tricky. Arguably, it will have a chilling effect on other public sector workers. The threat is there. On the other hand, a lot of things can happen this week. We don't know what's going to happen on Friday. The bill hasn't been passed yet, as far as I know. And so I think a lot of people will be sharpening their pencils and trying to figure out what to do.
Lots to keep our eyes on this upcoming Friday. Now, what other choices would CUPE have left if this notwithstanding clause is implemented, both legally and politically?
I think the simple answer is they'll have to huddle with their lawyers and figure this out. This is really a legal problem. It's not, it's also a political problem, but it's compounded by the fact that this government has a majority and was recently reelected.
All right, and taking a more broader perspective on this, historically, how have these previous labor disputes involving the notwithstanding clause unfolded?
Well, it's rare. I think I've read in the Globe Mail there's only been one other case, so this is quite unique and to most experts quite offensive.
And what would be your recommendations in terms of handling this dispute from the perspective of both sides here?
Well, I'm a advocate of free collective bargaining. I mean, the reason we have strikes and lockouts, which is quite infrequent, is it forces the parties to reassess their positions and assess what are the costs associated with the work stoppage relative to the cost of a new collective agreement in those terms. On the other hand, if you go down the road of back to work legislation, in my judgment, it should be interest arbitration. You can appoint a mediator arbitrator to resolve this dispute. Arbitrators will decide the case based on objective criteria. The terms set out in this legislation beg the question of whether they're anything but highly subjective, even arbitrary.
And is there anything that you are keeping your eyes on as this dispute unfolds, Doctor?
Well, I'm looking forward to Friday because it's sort of a black box at the moment. But I would think that, even if this legislation sticks and there's not much you can do with it, it's going to create a whole bunch of problems, not only in the public sector, but more generally in collective bargaining.
Lots to keep our eyes on. Dr. Rose, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you.
Forum Daily will be right back after the break with a look at major news stories and headlines from around the world as authorities in South Korea admit responsibility in a deadly crowd surge that left over 150 people dead. And UN experts inspect 2 sites in Ukraine that Russia identified in its dirty bomb allegations. These stories and more up next.